Hi, third graders. This is chapter 4 for how to eat fried worms. I'm going to share the screen and we are going to look at the next set of questions. How was the worm cooked? For number 2. For number 3, how did Tom convince Billy to eat the worm? Number 4, how did Billy act after eating the first worm? Why did Billy act that way? And number 5, what is the main conflict in the story? All right, now we'll start reading chapter 4. Chapter 4 is called The First Worm. The huge night crawler sprawled limply in the center of the plate, brown and steaming. Boiled, said Tom. We boiled it. So how was the first worm cooked? It was boiled. Billy storms about the barn, kicking barrels and posts, arguing, a night crawler isn't a worm. If it was a worm, it'd be called a worm. A night crawler's a night crawler. Finally, Joe ran off to get his father's dictionary. Night crawler, earthworm. A large earthworm found on the soil surface at night. So Joe goes and gets a dictionary for them to figure out what the definition was of night crawler. Billy kicked a barrel. It still wasn't fair. He didn't care what any dictionary said. Everybody knew the difference between a night crawler and a worm. Look at the thing. It was as big as a souvenir pencil from the Empire State Building. A souvenir is something you get when you visit somewhere, and the Empire State Building is in New York City. He poked it with his finger. Alan said they agreed right at the start that he and Joe could choose the worms. If Billy was going to cheat, the bet was off. He got up and started for the door. He guessed he had other things to do besides arguing all day with Fink. So Tom took Billy aside into a horse stall and put his arms around Billy's shoulder and talked to him about George Cunningham's brother's mini bike and how they could ride it on the trail under the power line behind Odell's farm, up and down the hills, bounding over rocks, rum. Sure, it was a big worm, but it'd only be a couple more bites. Did he want to lose a mini bike over 2 bites? Slop enough mustard and ketchup and horseradish on it, and he wouldn't even taste it. Yeah, said Billy, I could probably eat this one. But I gotta eat 15. You can't quit now, said Tom. Look at them, he nodded at Alan and Joe, waiting beside the orange crates. They'll tell everybody you were chicken. It'll be all over school. Come on. He led Billy back to the orange crates, sat him down, tied the napkin around his neck. Alan flourished the knife and fork. Would Monsieur likey carved lengthwise or curvewise? Ketchup, asked Joe, showing his teeth. Cut it out, Tom said Tom. Here, he glopped ketchup and mustard and horseradish on the night crawler, squeezed on a few drops of lemon juice, and salted and peppered it. Billy closed his eyes and opened his mouth. Out with it. Tom sliced off the end of the night crawler and forked it up. But just as he was about to poke it into Billy's open mouth, Billy closed his mouth and opened his eyes. No, let me do it. Tom handed him the fork. Billy gazed at the dripping ketchup and mustard, thinking, it's all right talking about worms, but doing it, Tom whispered in his ear. Mini bike. Glug. Billy poked the fork into his mouth, chewed furiously, gulp, gulp. His eyes crossed, warm, squinted shut. He flapped his arms wildly, and then opening his eyes, he grinned beatfully up at Tom. Superb, Gaston. Tom cut another piece, ketchup, mustard, and salt and peppered, horseradish and lemoned it, and handed the fork to Billy. Billy slugged it down, smacking his lips, and so they proceeded, now sprinkling on cinnamon and sugar, or a bite of cheese, some cracker crumbs, or Worcestershire sauce, until there was nothing on the plate but a few stray dabs of ketchup and mustard. Well, said Billy, standing up and wiping his mouth with his napkin. So we da mit de first curve. Nah, seconds. Let me look in your mouth, said Alan. Yeah, said Joe. See if he swallowed it. Alan and Joe scrutinized the inside of his mouth. Okay, said Tom. Leave him alone now. Come on. 1 down, 14 to go. How'd it taste? Asked Alan. Good, said Billy. Very fine. Whoo, Woo! He flapped his arms like a big bird and began to hop around the barn crying, Goot, goot, very fine, goot, goot. Alan and Joe and Tom looked worried. Yeah, goot, goot, how you feeling, Billy? Asked Tom. Yeah, stop flapping around and come tell us how you're feeling, said Joe. They huddled together by the orange crate as Billy hopped around and around them, flapping his arms. Goot, goot, very fine, hoo, hoo. Alan whispered. He's, Joe's edged towards the door. Don't let him see we're afraid. Crazy people are like dogs. If they see you're afraid, they'll attack. It couldn't be, whispered Tom, standing his ground. One worm. Goot, goot, screeching, Billy hopping higher and higher, drooling from his mouth. Come on, whispered Joe to Tom. Hey, Billy, burst out Tom suddenly in a hearty quaver voice. Cut it out with you. I want to ask you something. Billy's arms flapped slower. He tiptoed menacingly around Tom. His head cocked to one side, his cheek puffed up. Tom hugged himself, chuckling nervous. Hee hee, cut it out, will you, Billy? Hee hee. Billy pounced. Joe and Alan fled the barn door, banging behind them. Billy rolled on the floor, helpless with laughter. Tom clambered up, brushing himself off. Did you see their faces? Billy said, laughing, climbing over each other out the door. Oh, geez, Joe was pale as an onion. Yes, said Tom. Ha ha, you fooled them. Oh, geez, Billy sat up. Then he crawled over to the door and peered out through a knob hole. Look at them peeking up over the stone wall. Watch this. The door swung slowly open, screeching. Billy hopped onto the door sill, into the yard, up onto the stump, splashed into a puddle, flapping his arms, rolling his head. Alan and Joe galloped up the hill through the high grass, yelling, Here he comes. Get out of the way. And then Billy stopped hopping and climbing up on the stump, called in a shrill, girlish voice, Oh, boys, oh, where are you going? I'd something fine tell you, idle boys. Alan and Joe stopped and looked back. I'm going home, Ida boys, yelled Billy. Ida's hard. Who scared you? Called Alan. Yeah, yelled Joe. I guess I can go home without being called scared if I want to. But it ain't in a doubtful hurry, shouted Billy. I just remember I was supposed to help my mother wash windows this afternoon, said Alan. That's all. He turned and started up through the meadow, his hands in his pocket. Yeah, said Joe. Me too, he trudged after Alan. So they, with Billy acting and running around and acting like a bird, he scared the other two boys, and they said that they had to go home and help their mother wash the windows. So how did Tom convince Billy to eat the mini bike? Well, he reminded him about how did Tom convince Billy to eat the worm? He reminded him about the mini bike. And how did Billy act after eating the first worm? He was running around like a bird. And why did Billy act that way? Billy acted that way to scare the other two into thinking that him eating the worm did something to him. Finally, what is the main conflict in this story? So main conflict means what is the biggest problem in this story between characters? I want us to be thinking about that one, and we're going to get more in depth with that one tomorrow. So go ahead, stop the video, and do your Google form on chapters 3 and 4, which is located in the virtual classroom.